Minnesota sports flowing in their veins. Mackie and Judd on SKOR North and SKORNorth.com.
Catherine Raish, the highest-ranking personnel executive in the NFL, who is a woman. She is interviewing today for the Minnesota Vikings. She currently works for the Philadelphia Eagles and holding the old job that Andrew Berry had that he used. Obviously worked so well in the Eagles front office and then used that to become the Cleveland Browns GM. Similar situation for Catherine Raish. She is young, but she is brilliant and certainly has made her mark thus far in the NFL. She interviews for the Vikings today.
Yeah, the Vikings have been very busy the last 48 hours. And if you're wondering, okay, who have they interviewed? Who's up next? If you just follow the Vikings on social media, they got these little photoshopped graphics. You know, they've got the headshot of the different people that they interviewed. Judd's going through his different poses.
I'm going through all the motions that I would
audience.
if I was to have that opportunity to pose for a photo.
I think all companies should do that. You know,
I agree.
SKOR North has interviewed Barry for a part-time weekend production job. Hey guys,
a dating thing. Declan is going out on a date with so-and-so. And there's a picture of her, a little bio, went to De La Salle, graduated in 2000 something. You know what I mean?
It's a second interview.
It's a second date. Yes.
It's really weird because I've also dated a girl from De La Salle, so that was kind of a freakish look at the future there, Judd Zolgad.
That was a complete guess.
Hopefully she graduated. All right, this is Mackie and Judd, daily Minnesota sports entertainment.
I didn't go there, Declan.
Speculation, therapy. So let's talk head coaching candidates here because the Vikings have begun their interview journey. Nathaniel Hackett on Sunday this last week, and there's 6 more on their initial list. But Declan found this article from before the weekend on The Athletic, and they're using odds from, I believe, BetMGM. And so they had initial odds on who the favorites were to become the Vikings' next head coach. Doug Peterson initially was 3.5 to 1, the odds-on favorite. Eric Bieniemy was 4 to 1. Brian Daboll, offensive coordinator, Bills, 4.5 to 1. Brian Flores, 8 to 1, tied with internal candidate Andre Patterson at 8 to 1. You'll notice something about this initial list. This is the odds-on favorites according to BetMGM. None of these 5 showed up on the Vikings list of 7 that they put out. And I guess Doug Peterson may not have to show up. Maybe they had an informal conversation, but I find that very interesting. Do you feel like this would still reflect the odds-on favorites, or do you think the odds-on favorite is on the list of 7 that they submitted out to the public, or at least that was reported before the weekend?
While that list that you just read of the candidates and the odds is flawed, I will say this: Bieniemy, don't dismiss him yet. I've heard that there is still a good chance that they're going to talk to him. So Daboll, I've heard zero steam about, which surprises me. Like, you would think that would be a guy that you would want to talk to. Now, keep in mind too, there's something here, and again, I'll go back to saying my concern is I don't know a thing about what the actual plan is, okay? But I will say this, in the case of Bieniemy, Leftwich, and Daboll, their teams are playing and their teams are expected to make deep runs. And there does become a point in time, I think, where some assistants say, let's back off a little bit here. Like, I'm preparing for games. And when you accept the opportunity to do these, I guess now what are our Zoom conference calls, but when you accept that, like, you need to come with a plan and ideas and thoughts. And if you're coaching a team and in charge of offense, right, I think that there are some who are like, hell yeah, I'm going to do that. And I think there are some who say, let's slow cook this, which is why we have seen in the past quite a few times guys who have the most success, or their teams do, don't get jobs immediately. So I have no steam on that. I think that they are still would like to and are going to talk to Bieniemy at least. But my point being is that list might not be as flawed as that list appears right now. If indeed we're talking about the Bills, the Chiefs, and teams like that trying to get to their coaches trying to get to the end of the line of the season and then say, hey, I'm still here, but my team took priority.
So you're hearing that just because Bieniemy is not on the list right now, he could easily be added.
That they might like
could
him.
be in this conversation.
Yes,
and that it's also possible that this head coaching search it might not be resolved until the Super Bowl, right?
Correct.
Like if let's say the Packers and Nathaniel Hackett or Eric Bieniemy and the Chiefs, if one of those guys is it, and even if they've had some interviews, they probably wouldn't announce that until. Do they have to wait? You have to wait, don't you?
If you hire a GM if you hire your GM from a team that is playing, the only stipulation is that person immediately has to leave their previous job, but they can go. So like if the Vikings elected to hire a Packers executive tomorrow, he can leave, or she. Coaches, you can't. So yes, you're right. It's gotta play out slower, and there's always the chance behind the scenes that could be the case.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about two candidates. One that's on their current list, which we'll get to, and he was the offensive coordinator in last night's blowout win by the Rams, Kevin O'Connell. I want to dive into him in a second, but let's go down this Bieniemy path here. Let's assume that at some point they're going to have a conversation. It makes sense. He was an assistant coach with the Vikings. He was Adrian Peterson's position coach back under Brad Childress. We both covered him. You covered him probably more closely in your role with the Star Tribune. He's been a candidate for a few years. He's interviewed several times with several teams, and to this point, it just hasn't clicked. I don't know if he just doesn't connect with the people that he's interviewing with, or why he doesn't have a head coaching job yet. But from what you remember covering Bieniemy back between 2006, 2009, what can you tell the audience about him? What do you remember about it?
I liked him a lot. Straight shooter. Like I don't think that I sensed zero BS, which I liked. But I guess my question now is this: if he's still the same way, and guys do change, but if he's still the same way, is he going to be seen as a red flag guy? And this is not fair, but based on the fact that he's tough on players and he's not going to sugarcoat things or be your therapist. And that was sort of Mike, or that was Mike. So is that fair? Absolutely not. But that's how this league works. Like, I would say that Brian Flores has zero shot here, based on the fact that he would be far too much like Mike. I think Todd Bowles, and this league always operates in, we like to hire the opposite of the people or the guy that we just fired. And so if Eric is still the same and just a savvier coach, which, clearly being around Reed now for an extended period of time, he probably is a savvier play caller type of coach. I think that might be an issue, because I think they're going to look for a coach who does what the player said, which is be more personable. Eric was Phil Peterson's position coach for how long? A long time, like 5 years, you think?
Well, yeah, he was on the staff for 5 years. I think he was the running backs coach for all 5 of those years. At one point, he was also elevated to like assistant head coach for like 2010. Okay. But yes, he was 5 years of Adrian's position coach.
But those two butted heads. And now in Eric's credit, I will say I believe that Eric made AP a better player. Like, he challenged him continually on a lot of things. And I don't see a downside there. But there was a point, I think it was a game in San Francisco, finally, this is like 3 or 4 years in for Peterson, where Eric was riding AP, and AP finally basically blew a gasket and said, shut the bleep up, I'm sick of this. And you know what? That can be constructive. But are things like that going to be seen as a negative because that's what Mike would have done? The sins of Mike are going to be held against prospective candidates who are too much like Mike.
Yes. And of course, all of the, you're trying to figure out, because I remember that too. I mean, I remember being at multiple training camp practices, and EB would just be lighting into Peterson.
2-8, you stupid, what are you doing?
Yeah, he's definitely
that great voice.
And again, maybe we're not around him on a daily basis during his time in Kansas City, maybe he softened up a little bit, but that style, I think, in 2021-22 can wear on you as a player. I don't know if that can be your style overseeing a full 53-man roster. Maybe that's part of the reason why he hasn't emerged with a job yet, too. How responsible was he ultimately for 12 men in the huddle, NFC Championship game 2009? Because it was his position group that sent an extra. Now, Fahu Tahi wasn't supposed to be in the game. And so there's been a lot of discussion that the miscommunication was on somebody on the assistant staff, and Bieniemy was the running backs coach.
Going back to that, I seem to recall that in the immediate aftermath of that complete cluster bleep, that Bieniemy was initially blamed, like totally blamed. I heard subsequently that it was actually tight ends coach Jimmy Johnson, not that one, who sent in players or who played a role. And also Brad's excitement himself. He would get like totally caught up in the game and not calm things down. Didn't help. So I think to blame Eric alone is too much. It was probably an entire offensive coaching staff who were on the field thing, but we found out the more people that we talked to that it probably was ultimately shared. And it's not like Bieniemy went rogue and said, "Hey, Tahi, you're the fullback, go in there." So yeah, I would not at this point in time, 12 years after the fact, I would not hold that against him. But I do think if he comes in and he is still, hey, guys are going to play my way and it's going to be my way and blah, blah, blah. I think that there's a point in time post Frazier where that would have been refreshing. I think now it's going to be seen as, oh boy, we sort of just had that guy.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing that I think, and I'm not saying that this is fair, but that might be startling for people. If you go on Eric Bieniemy's Wikipedia page, for instance, a lot of fans and people are trying to figure out, okay, who are some of these people I've never heard of that are interviewing for GM and head coaching jobs? When you go to Eric Bieniemy's Wikipedia page, for instance, the Kansas City Chiefs section is 1 paragraph. The legal issues section is 5 paragraphs.
Yeah, this has been,
And the latest entry is April 2001, so it's been 21 years since, and that was he was arrested for driving under the influence in 2001, and then you have to go back 8 years before that. So the bulk of this is like late 80s, college, Colorado, to early 90s, basically before he was drafted to the NFL, or like right around that time. But 1993, Bieniemy was arrested in Boulder, Colorado for allegedly harassing a female parking attendant. According to a police report, he put his hands around the attendant's neck. Like, again, this is 30 years ago, immature, young, stupid, whatever.
Still going to reflect,
And but it's definitely something that it's part of his resume.
Right.
And I don't know to what extent this scares teams off. Like when you go to Byron Leftwich's Wikipedia page or Nathaniel Hackett's Wikipedia page, is there a 5-paragraph section called legal issues?
No, just loves football.
Just
5 paragraphs. He loves football.
Yeah. So I don't know, man. I've kind of gone back and forth on Bieniemy, not because of legal issues. I mean, I'm confident that he got a DUI in 2001. That happens. People make mistakes. It's basically been 30 years since anything has popped up. I'm more curious about his personality because I agree with all the things, and I observed a lot of those things too. It's like if you're looking for someone to come in here and put their arm around players, I just don't know that you're going to get that with Eric Bieniemy.
And I think it would be. I think he can do it, but it's more of the tough love thing. It's not his fault that he might have some similarities to Zim.
Yeah, they might just be looking for something else. And maybe he winds up getting hired. Who knows? And then, of course, you're trying to unpack, like, Andy Reid is this offensive mastermind. Pat Mahomes over here, like, how much is he driving the development of Pat Mahomes, driving the offensive and schematic success, right? Or is he, like, he's part of it, but when you take him away from that infrastructure and you put him in with a different quarterback, different personnel, that it's just not going to be the same potion.
To steal your phrase, I think the biggest question, and it's hard to quantify it until you actually see it in action, is do the Hackett's, Bieniemys, and guys like that of the world have the ability to steal the secret sauce?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like, well, if you weren't doing it, you suck. That's not fair. But it is, how much do you know now, and what can you give us? Because if you come in like, well, I mean, I learned a lot, but I got a lot of my own ideas that I've been waiting. In fact, I like to run the football a lot. It's like, oh boy. But if you spend 4, 5, 6 years with the Chiefs and you picked up things, okay, that's intriguing, right? Because it's not fair. It's not fair to say, well, you were in a great infrastructure and you're probably not good. If you're smart and you learned and adapted, you could be incredibly valuable, but you don't know that until you actually see it.
Yes. And so Patrick Mahomes' first year as a starter, so he was drafted and basically sat for 2017. He started one game, but he basically sat the whole first year. They worked on his mechanics. He sat behind Alex Smith. And then in 2018, he was the best quarterback in the NFL out of the gate. And that was Eric Bieniemy's first year as an offensive coordinator. I love Nathaniel Hackett, but Hackett came along when Aaron Rodgers was already an MVP finished product, right? I think with Hackett, it's more interesting that, he coached up Blake Bortles and brought that team to helped bring that team to an AFC Championship game. They had a league average offense in Buffalo and went 9-7 with EJ Manuel and Kyle Orton as a quarterback. So he's been able to show it with garbage starting quarterbacks and with Aaron Rodgers. Bieniemy is almost even more interesting from the quarterback connection perspective because he was hands-on in the molding of Pat Mahomes throwing 50 touchdown passes in his first year as a starter.
Yep.
And that's, credit to Pat Mahomes for being a generational talent, but there's a reason why he wasn't the number one overall pick. He needed molding. He was talented but needed molding, and Bieniemy was clearly a part of that molding.
Right, coach, too. I think the other thing that would be very intriguing to know from the Wilfs standpoint and the standpoint of this franchise is this, too. So in 2006, you hired Andy Reid's OC, right, who was a hot candidate in Childress at the time. And you sort of found out, okay, he knows some stuff, but he doesn't know. I don't think that Brad brought the amount of coaching acumen that they had hoped for. So I wonder if that would be unfairly or fairly reflected at all in the thought process and discussions about Eric as well. Because you sort of went down that path, and personnel wise, I think Brad was good. I like the fact, especially now in retrospect, that Brad got here and the first thing he said, and he was correct, was, I'm going to build both lines out. Our lines are going to be kick-ass. And they were good. But I think as far as in-game coaching went, play calling for sure, he didn't learn nearly as much as you thought. And so if you're the Wilfs, I think that's a discussion. At least, do we go down the same path again and think that Eric learned more about actual offensive efficiency than Brad did?
Dex, if the Vikings hired Eric Bieniemy, what would your level of interest or excitement be?
I would on a scale 1 to 10, 10 being the most excited, 1 being not at all. I would actually have it at about a 7.
That's good.
I don't think he's an incompetent coach or someone that I'd be disappointed that the Vikings hired with. The organization's familiar with him. He's old school, but I do think his players love to play for him. AP, let's be honest, was not the bastion of excellence when it comes to players that just in general of character and whatnot. So I'm not going to look at how he treated AP and their relationship as gospel, but he's helped the Chiefs become a legitimate offense and has exploded those playmakers. I know Pat Mahomes has a ton to do with that, but if Eric Bieniemy got hired as Vikings head coach, I could be in on that. I could absolutely be in on that.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see if he gets an interview here. That's step one. He's got to make the list. You got to make the list first.
You know who could thrive? Wong Wu. Because he's a Chiefs player, right?
Yeah, sort of a. How can you get creative with Wong Wu? 8
Jerick
times
McKinnon.
a game.
Yes,
Jerick
McKinnon on Sunday
exploded for Kansas City.
Dude,
yeah, he's
Jerick
awesome.
McKinnon.
I love Jet.
You knew when he was on the team, it was like, why are you letting him go? Give me 2 Jerick McKinnons over a highly paid. And I love Dalvin Cook, but God, it's fun to watch Jerick McKinnon, man.
Wong Wu, man.
So another name here. Last night, Rams just beat the brakes off the Cardinals last night, and Cliff Kingsbury might get fired now. The offensive coordinator for the Rams is Kevin O'Connell. He's on the Vikings list. And I think a lot of people are looking at the list like, okay, I know who Dan Quinn is. I know who Todd Bowles is. I know who Kellen Moore is because the Cowboys are on national TV all the time. And we've talked about Nathaniel Hackett. But you kind of get to Kevin O'Connell and you're like, all right, whatever. I don't know who that guy is. He's just another guy in his 30s who coaches under the Sean McVay coaching tree. But he's 36 years old. He was actually a former third-round pick in the NFL. He was a quarterback at San Diego State back in like the mid-2000s. He spent 3 years in Washington with the Washington football team as the quarterback's coach, including 2017 with Kirk Cousins, and then 1 year as the offensive coordinator in Washington before they changed out the staff. He's been the Rams offensive coordinator for the last 2 years. And what's the most interesting about O'Connell to me is the tree that he coaches under. The Sean McVay coaching tree has turned out to be very interesting in recent years. You could almost make a case that the McVay coaching tree is more successful in like 3 years than Bill Belichick's coaching tree has been in 20.
Oh, yeah.
So Matt LaFleur he was the OC. He comes from, and now LaFleur left the Rams, I believe, to go to the Titans to call plays.
Yep.
To get that
OC.
extra year or two of experience calling plays.
Yep.
Zach Taylor was part of the McVay coaching tree, and now he is helping with the development of Joe Burrow, and the Bengals won their first playoff game in 30 years. Brandon Staley on the defensive side with the Chargers and the way that they've become competitive. So, could O'Connell be part of this young, mid-30s collection of innovative coaches that are coming out from the Sean McVay coaching tree? I would say that the tree itself is intriguing enough to be interested in Kevin O'Connell. What do you guys think?
I talked to him for sure. The question again comes back to me is the most important thing, at least at first, is can you lead a team? What's your plan? My second concern, but this is hard to get at, is since you don't call plays, just from a schematic standpoint, what do you know? What do you bring?
You got to be a big time leader.
Yeah. And but I mean, I do fear from these trees, because you can get great coaches. There's no question about it. But I fear at times that you grow enamored with these coaching trees, and then if you get the one dud, it's like, okay, this is great. Like, this guy can't. I mean, I go back to Brad Childers' biggest weakness was in-game play calling, which was supposed to be a strength. So that's where I'm concerned. But I think in the first round of these discussions, the most important thing for a guy like O'Connell is, what do you bring as far as like what Sean brings in guiding the team? Because you do want, the one thing that you want to have first day of training camp is a person walk in that room and control things in a positive way. Well, like you need that seismic shift. That's going to be an important thing, because it was crystal clear by the end when Mike walked in, guys were like, "Oh, this is great," right? So,
yeah. Well, but there's, and again, like, who knows? It's so early on. Like Zach Taylor, I think LaFleur. I don't think it's too early. It's nice to have Aaron Rodgers, but they've won 13 games. Haven't they won like 13 and 13 the first 3 years?
I'll be very curious to see. Like, I think you're right, but it's going to be fun when the first game where it's, please welcome Jordan Love and the Green Bay Packers. I really want to see that.
Of course, almost any coach is going to be struggling to get to the playoffs with an unqualified starting quarterback. But with Zach Taylor and with Brandon Staley, it's kind of amazing. Those guys, like Staley was on the defensive side of the ball, but he had 1 year of coordinating experience with the Rams, but had soaked in enough leadership over the years and soaked in things from Sean McVay. Zach Taylor spent 1 year as the quarterback's coach.
He is
that was
Sherman's son-in-law.
So that helps get
the former Packers coach.
That'll help.
But still, like,
yeah,
you're not just going to hire him. He's in his mid-30s. Like, he spent 1 year as the quarterback's coach, never a coordinator in the NFL, never called plays, but had soaked in enough from Sean McVay's tree of leadership that he got the job. And now, could he flame out too? Maybe.
It's got Joe Burrow, though, like you said.
He's off to a nice start. So again, like Kevin O'Connell is a name that I initially was like, I don't know, man. Like, just because you had coffee with Sean McVay doesn't mean that you're gonna, because that's what it kind of seems like. I hung out with Sean McVay in Vegas one time. Okay, cool, you're hired. But digging a little bit deeper, and I even watched like a half hour of press conference videos just to get a feel for his personality. Seems like in the way that he was mic'd up a couple times. You can watch like practice videos and stuff, and like he connects with players. He's interesting. I wouldn't write him off just because we've never heard of him and just because we might think Sean McVay is the only mastermind there. Any other thoughts here as we're getting into a week where they're going to wind up with like 15 interviews under their belts here between GM and head coach, and they might even add more names. So any thoughts from you guys before we get to who gets it, who doesn't?
I think the timetable is going to be, I think they're going to pare the 8 GM candidates down to about 3 by the weekend. And so I think that we could have them hiring a GM by some point mid next week, which would be productive. Like, that's pretty good. Here's my thought. I got a quick thought about the fact that I think the Vikings might be, not on purpose, but I think they might be backing into something that they can exploit, which they should. And it's this one. It's what we talked about with assistant coaches, especially right now, being in the midst of, if they're with good playoff teams, the potential for a run. And I don't have the research on this, but it seems to me that it's not a bold statement to say that the trend in this league is to make your coaching hires as quick as you possibly can so that you hit the ground running for the combine. And that what we see a lot is successful teams don't have their coordinators or assistants poached until the next year if they go out, because teams say, we can't wait till that. Like the Super Bowl, are you kidding? We can't wait. I think in the Vikings case, if they do this right and just cool their jets, because 2022, it might be important, right? But what's really important is the future of the franchise. And what's really important is making sure you get this right. And so I think what we're going to see here pretty quick with all of the head coaching openings is they're going to start to get filled, because teams are going to say, we got to have our guy. Dan Quinn, come on down. You'd be like, oh, Dan Quinn's gone. Todd Bowles, you're next. Or guys who at least have had their teams eliminated. My point being, you could be sitting on a GM being very much part of the coaching search for a select few who don't get jobs because their teams make runs. And I would argue, I've always thought this thing of like, our coach has to be in place for the combine, totally in place. We got to have him infiltrated with our system. I think that's a bunch of BS. I think the most important thing is to get the hire right. And so if the Green Bay Packers go to the Super Bowl and teams are like, well, we're out, Hackett, it's going to take too long, right? If I'm the Vikings, I'm licking my chops. Yeah. I'm licking my chops, and I'm like, hold on a second here. You're all passing? Cool. So I think if the Vikings play their cards right here and they don't panic, because teams are going to start to hire coaches, and that could cause them to panic, but don't. I think that you are positioning yourself for a very savvy move, perhaps by accident, but it's really smart.
Yep. No. It is kind of funny how teams, we don't have to wait till, okay, the teams that are in the Super Bowl are very well coached, and a lot of those candidates are going to wind up being the best head coaches, right? You know, just look all throughout history. It's great coordinators that take their team to the Super Bowl, and so you should be willing to be patient. Also, didn't they move the combine further back this year? Wasn't the combine moved to like early March?
It might have been because the Super Bowl is later in February than it used to be. So that's very possible. But the point is, screw the combine. You want to get this right. Yes. Like this whole thing of like, oh, the coach won't see all of
your scouts can be at the combine.
Draft picks.
Yes. Yeah. Rob Brzezinski and whoever you keep in that front office.
The new GM will be there.
Yes. Yeah. I also have a feeling there remains Jim Harbaugh steam here too. I feel like there's a couple little bombs ready to be dropped at some point in the next couple weeks. Like this Raiders, like Mike Mayock got fired yesterday. I was just
going to say the Raiders Harbaugh connection.
Mm-hmm.
Going
Very
back.
Interesting.
Going to the Raiders.
The Dolphins, why would you blow out Brian Flores without a pretty ironclad idea of who's going to replace him.
Reckless speculation.
So I just feel like, I don't know, there just seems like a lot percolating under the surface here. But yeah, we'll get, by the way, Alex Boone's going to join us for the Tuesday edition of Purple Daily. We'll get his thoughts on everything Vikings head coach search, GM search,